What if I told you that giving students like maximum, completely unstructured freedom is actually one of the absolute worst things you can do for neurodivergent learners?
I mean, it completely upends, the traditional assumption we have about what an accommodation looks like.
Right.
We tend to think that more freedom automatically equals better accessibility, but the data tells a very different, much more complex story.
And for you listening right now, the learner who really wants to cut through the noise and figure out how to, actually design systems that work for the human brain, that complexity is exactly what we're tearing apart today.
It's a really vital topic.
It is. Our mission for this deep dive is to unpack the reality of neurodiversity. And we're going to look at how instructional designers, managers, or frankly, anyone communicating online can use the principles of universal design for learning to build environments that don't, passively exhaust the people using them.
And we have a pretty formidable stack of research driving this analysis today.
We really do. We are pulling insights from a focus group study on cognitive load in online learning, a cross-sectional survey of occupational therapy students, a conceptual analysis of compassionate pedagogy, and a systematic review of neurodiversity in online education. So we are going deep into the mechanics of learning.
Yeah, and the overarching theme across all these sources is a fundamental challenge to how we measure competence.
Right.
We assume we're measuring a student's grasp of the material, but often we're really just measuring their tolerance for friction.
Wow, yeah. So let's start with the baseline, because before we can critique the design of an online portal or a course, we have to talk about the users themselves. For decades, the educational system has operated almost exclusively under what's called the medical model of disability.
Right, and the medical model, well, it operates on a standard of normative brain function.
Like a default setting.
Precisely. If an individual deviates from that norm, so if they process sensory input differently, or if their attention regulation doesn't match the traditional classroom structure, the medical model identifies that as a deficit.
It's seen as a broken part.
Yeah. The goal then becomes treatment, remediation, or figuring out how to, quote unquote, fix the individual so they can survive the standard environment.
The sources we're analyzing argue aggressively against that, pushing instead for the neurodiversity paradigm. But I want to avoid just throwing around buzzwords.
Fair enough.
What is the actual structural difference in that approach?
So the neurodiversity paradigm shifts the locus of the problem entirely. It argues that neurological variations, things like autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, these are naturally occurring variations in the human genome.
And we are looking at roughly, 15 to 20% of the global population?
Yes, exactly. So under this paradigm, these aren't flawed iterations of a normal brain. They're simply different cognitive frameworks for perceiving and, predicting the world.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because treating learning differences like a deficit, well, it clearly creates massive friction.
Oh, absolutely.
Treating learning differences like a bug to be fixed kind of misses the point entirely. It's more like biodiversity in an ecosystem or, a computer running a different but equally valid operating system.
That's a great way to look at it.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating here is that from this perspective, harm or disability often comes from the interaction between the person and an inflexible environment, rather than just the condition itself.
Okay, but if it's just a different cognitive framework, why is there so much communication breakdown between neurotypical educators and neurodivergent students?
That brings us to a foundational concept in the research called the double empathy problem.
The double empathy problem.
Yeah.
Okay.
Under the medical model, if a neurotypical person and an autistic person have a misunderstanding, the assumption is always that the autistic person lacks social processing skills.
Right, the blame is one-sided.
Exactly. But the double empathy problem argues that the breakdown is mutual.
Meaning the neurotypical person is equally failing to empathize with the autistic person's communication style?
Yes. But let's look at the mechanism behind it, because it's not just a lack of trying.
Okay.
Our brains use predictive processing. We build mental models of social interaction based on our own neurology.
Right.
When a neurotypical brain tries to predict the intent or emotion of a neurodivergent brain, its predictive model fails. They are fundamentally misinterpreting each other's signals.
Wow.
So the friction isn't located in the neurodivergent person. The friction is located in the space between them.
And because the educational environment is built by and for the neurotypical majority, the burden of managing that friction falls entirely on the neurodivergent student,
Completely.
which leads directly to masking. The research highlights masking as a massive barrier to learning, but I think, people misunderstand what it actually costs a student to do it.
They really do. Masking isn't just putting on a brave face. It is an active, continuous neurological drain. Well, let's say a student has a natural urge to stim, maybe bouncing their leg or tapping a pen, because that physical movement actually helps their brain regulate focus.
Right, it's functional for them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if the classroom culture views that as disruptive or weird, the student has to actively suppress it.
So they are using top-down cognitive control to, inhibit a natural regulatory behavior.
Precisely. And that requires a ton of executive function. They are rerouting energy from their prefrontal cortex to monitor their posture, force eye contact, and modulate their voice to mimic neuronormative standards.
It sounds exhausting.
It is. By the time the professor actually introduces the core lesson, the student's cognitive tank is already empty. They're physically exhausted just trying to exist in the room.
If the environment is draining their tank before the lesson even starts, we really have to look specifically at the modern online learning environment.
Yeah, we do.
Because during the shift to digital learning, there was this utopian idea that, asynchronous online classes would level the playing field.
Right, that it would fix everything.
But what is actually happening in a student's brain when they log into a virtual learning environment?
To map that out, the systematic review leans really heavily on cognitive load theory.
Okay.
This refers to the total amount of working memory resources required to perform a learning task. Working memory is a highly limited bottleneck in the brain. You can only hold a few pieces of novel information at a time.
So it's not a limitless hard drive. It's more like a juggler. You can only keep so many bowling pins in the air before you just drop all of them.
That's a much more accurate visual, yeah. Now, cognitive load is divided into two main categories: intrinsic load and extraneous load.
Oh, let's break those down.
Intrinsic load is the weight of the bowling pin itself. It's the inherent complexity of the subject. So if you are learning organic chemistry, the intrinsic load is naturally high.
Which makes sense.
Right. And you want the student's working memory focused entirely on that intrinsic load.
And the other category, extraneous load, is like the wind blowing against the juggler.
Yes, exactly. Extraneous load is the mental effort required to navigate how the instruction is delivered. It has nothing to do with organic chemistry.
It's the poorly designed PDF.
Yes, it's the fact that the syllabus is buried 4 folders deep in the online portal. It's the video player that just won't buffer properly.
This is where the focus group study gets really fascinating, because when researchers analyze the experiences of neurotypical versus neurodivergent students, the primary source of their cognitive load was entirely different.
Night day.
The neurotypical students reported that their main struggle was the intrinsic load, the actual difficulty of grasping new academic concepts.
But the neurodivergent students reported their working memory was being hijacked almost entirely by the extraneous load.
The environment itself was the barrier.
Exactly. Massive walls of text on a screen without visual breaks. Overlapping audio during chaotic Zoom discussions.
Even tools designed to be accessible backfired. I mean, the studies cited automated transcripts as a huge source of extraneous load because they were often inaccurate.
Yes, the AI transcripts.
Right. A neurotypical student might just gloss over a badly transcribed word, but a neurodivergent student might spend massive amounts of working memory trying to decode what the phonetic typo was supposed to mean, completely losing the thread of the lecture in the process.
And this neurological bottleneck completely alters what study strategies are even viable.
Which brings us to the core solution proposed in the research: Universal Design for Learning, or UDL.
Right. The entire premise is to build accessibility into the architectural blueprint of the course from day one, rather than trying to retrofit it later with that wooden ramp.
It focuses on 3 domains, right? Engagement, representation, and action and expression.
Yes.
Let's break those down. So representation is the what of learning. Instead of just a massive wall of text, a UDL approach provides the information in multiple formats automatically, like A video, an audio track, and a well-formatted text document.
Exactly. And action and expression is the how of learning. It means giving students multiple ways to demonstrate their competence.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
Letting a student choose between writing a 10-page paper, recording a podcast, or building a visual presentation. I mean, that sounds like a beautiful utopian ideal, but it also sounds like an administrative nightmare. How does a professor teaching a 300-person intro class actually grade that fairly?
It's a fair question, but it forces the instructor to evaluate what they're actually testing. Are you testing the student's ability to format a standard academic essay, or are you testing their understanding of the French Revolution? If the core competency is historical analysis, the rubric should measure the depth of that analysis, regardless of the medium. Yes, it requires more upfront design, but it eliminates the constant need to manage individualized accommodation requests later on.
I see. It shifts the burden of design from the student back to the institution.
Precisely.
But let's look at the third domain, engagement. This is the why of learning, how we motivate students. And this is where that massive curveball from the occupational therapy survey study comes in.
This is my favorite part of the data.
Mine too.
The researchers surveyed students on what instructional methods they actually preferred. Now, if we assume that neurodivergent students just need alternative pathways, you would naturally predict they would want maximum unstructured flexibility.
That was totally my assumption. I figured ultimate flexibility is the best accommodation, but they didn't want that.
No, they didn't.
The neurodivergent students actually rated highly unstructured learning significantly lower than their neurotypical peers. It's fascinating. They strongly preferred being pre-assigned to groups by the instructor rather than picking their own teams. They preferred fixed due dates over completely flexible ones, and they actively disliked the flipped classroom model, doing an ambiguous activity first with the discussion to clarify it later.
So why does a brain that supposedly needs flexibility reject unstructured freedom?
Because unstructured freedom is functionally just ambiguity. And ambiguity is a massive source of extraneous cognitive load.
That makes so much sense. Think about the mechanics of picking a group for a project.
Oh, it's a nightmare.
For a neurodivergent student, especially one dealing with the double empathy problem and social masking we talked about, having to navigate the unspoken social hierarchy of finding a partner requires immense working memory.
Exactly. When you don't know the parameters, you have to spend your cognitive energy trying to predict the rules of the environment instead of just engaging with the material.
You're trying to figure out what you're even supposed to do. Right. So clear boundaries, structured expectations, and predictable routines remove that extraneous load.
Clear boundaries are actually a form of compassion.
Yes. Structure is compassion.
That fundamentally reframes a conversation. Designing for the margins improves the core experience for everybody.
It's exactly.
Providing an accurate text transcript alongside a video doesn't just help a student with auditory processing issues. It helps the neurotypical student whose primary language isn't English, or the parent who is trying to study on a noisy train while commuting after a long shift.
It is the curb cut effect applied to cognition. When you remove the friction of a bad interface or rigid expectations, you free up the working memory of the entire cohort.
So for you listening right now, whether you are an instructional designer building a corporate training module, a manager structuring weekly team meetings, or just someone trying to communicate complex ideas online, this completely changes your fundamental objective.
It really does.
Your goal isn't just to be compliant with disability laws. Your goal is to systematically hunt down and eliminate extraneous cognitive load.
Because every single ounce of effort your audience spends deciphering your formatting or guessing at your unspoken expectations is an ounce of effort they cannot spend engaging with your actual ideas.
You have to stop building a single factory line and hoping everyone can just survive the conveyor belt.
Which really forces us to look toward the horizon.